Throughout history, empires have risen to power and fallen drastically. In this video, we will explore the decline of civilization.
Empires fall when a multitude of internal and external factors affect them. For example, an internal factor might be political corruption. When high-ranking officers invest less into the country and more investment into their personal affairs, then this can lead to a weaker economy. For example, if a ruler decides to hoard money, this could lead to less money in the system, meaning less money being spent by the people. This means that less money earned by businesses leads to a more unstable country. This internal instability can lead to rebellion, leading to a weaker country more viable to being attacked by external forces. Another example of internal factor could be disease. Disease can also reduce a population of a country and force people to leave the country in fear. Less people means a weaker country due to less taxes and surplus from less farmers and merchants. An example of an external factor is outside invaders. If outside invaders forcefully take over an empire, the empire could count as being taken over. Overall, there is no one factor that leads to the fall of an empire. It is a multitude of factors that lead to its fall.
One very good example of the combination of all these factors of decline can be seen in Rome. And although these factors can often lead to a collapse of an empire, there's still debate on whether or not Rome actually collapsed. In this debate, there are two main arguments. First, the decline and fall argument. The main point of this argument is that Rome collapsed and fell, going from a large, influential empire to nothing of importance. Before getting to details, though, remember that the argument says it's just a gradual process, and although Rome did decline and fall, it didn't just happen overnight. Towards the end of Rome, its army began to employ barbarians, and the empire was often faced with warfare and rebellions from the barbarians, who would eventually sack Rome multiple times, supporting the idea that the main factor Rome fell was because of barbarian attacks. Another point the argument makes is that the fall of Rome, populations decreased rapidly and cities began to disappear. This would lead to the decrease of trade and good production, which can be expected in the decline of an empire. Lastly, another reason is that this argument is widely accepted is because the state of the government by the end looked like one you would expect to see in a fallen empire. It was incredibly destabilized and decentralized. The emperor no longer held as much power. It was the local landowners. The other argument was the transformation argument. The argument says that the term decline and fall doesn't quite describe what happened. They don't think Rome fell, but was rather transformed into something different, but still Roman. One main point of the argument is the fact that the entire eastern half of the empire still exists. How can an empire have fallen if half of it still exists? Also, it says if an empire has fallen, the lives of the people must have changed drastically, but really 90% of the population was peasants, and their lives didn't change at all.
The economy of Rome played a huge part in the fall of the Roman Empire. The economy started declining when the empire spent lots of money on Asian luxuries such as silk and spices. Rome was exporting gold and silver while importing Asian luxuries. The silks mainly served as decor in the homes of the rich. The value of the Roman currency, the denarius, was decreasing because the government was lowering the silver content and size of their nearly pure silver coins. Since the denarius was losing its value, inflation became another economic factor contributing to the fall of the empire. Due to the high cost on Asian luxuries, there was a cycle of economic chaos, starting with the empires raising the taxes and debasing coinage. This led to inflation, which wrecked the economy. Soldiers in the Roman army demanded more money, which the empire didn't have. The empire needed more money, so the empire raised taxes and reduced the silver content of the denarii, bringing us back to the beginning of the cycle. Diocletian was one empire who fell victim to this vicious cycle, because his economic reform was to improve the tax collection in order to pay the soldiers. However, the taxation was oppressive, thus squeezing the money out of the public and stifling the economy. This reform left Rome's economy in stagnation. These acts of taxing caused revolts and civil wars. The cycle of economic chaos directly correlates to the cycle of military chaos. The empire was not able to pay the soldiers, so they got mad and revolted. As the emperor was not able to pay the money soldiers demanded, they got mad and declared their own generals as emperor. To put the generals on the throne, soldiers abandoned their post on the frontiers. Seeing this opportunity, the Germanic tribes and parts of the revived Persian Empire attacked the vulnerable frontiers. Civil wars and revolts erupted, essentially destroying Rome's economy. The two cycles are the causes and results of each other, joining them together as one whole larger cycle. Not only did Diocletian have economic reforms, but also military reforms. His first military reform was improving the army by enlarging it. The second reform was making the legions more mobile. They were now on horseback. The legions decreased in size, so they were more manageable and easier to control. For example, if there used to be 6,000 soldiers making up one legion, now there are 4,000 soldiers per legion. So as the army increased in size, so did the number of legions making up the army. When Rome was a republic, one of the factors that caused it to fall was the dangerous power of the generals. The loyalty of the soldiers was to their generals rather than the empire because of the generals who provided and supplied their military. That was how generals were able to successfully rebel and revolt against the empire. To prevent that, one of Diocletian's reforms was to separate the power in the military. He separated the civil and military authority so they were less likely to rebel. Unfortunately, his reform did not stop generals from continuing to revolt and rebel against the empire. This was the Roman army before Diocletian recruited Germanic tribesmen. After Diocletian's military reform, the Germanic tribesmen infiltrated Rome when they were recruited. The majority of the Germanic tribesmen rebelled against Diocletian, so in a way, they barbarized the Roman army. Their entrance into the army and rebellion against Rome supports the idea that the Germanic tribesmen infiltrated the empire because they started in the Roman army and attacked Rome from within.
The Barbarians were many different clans surrounding Rome that were thought of as uncivilized and inferior, and their attacks had a large part in bringing down Rome. One of the big attacks of Rome by barbaric tribes was an attack from the Visigoths. They were a tribe that had been pushed into Rome by the Huns, and after a while became part of Rome, including the army. Eventually they began experiencing prejudice, inflated taxes, and corruption. The Visigoths started a revolt and defeated the Eastern Roman Empire, sacking Rome in 410 AD in what was more of an internal revolt than an external attack, since the Visigoths were already a part of the army. Many historians consider this to be the official date of the fall of Rome. Attila the Hun ruled the Huns, another barbaric tribe, from 433 to 453 AD. In 434, Rome attempted to make a peace treaty with the Huns, but in 444 the Huns attacked Rome, resulting in another barbaric attack that contributed to the fall of Rome. A final example of a sack of Rome is the attack from the Vandals in 455 AD. They were another Germanic tribe that, like the Visigoths, had been pushed close to the Roman Empire by the Huns, putting pressure on Rome, who established a brief alliance. This alliance fell apart quickly, and by 455, the Vandals had gained enough power that they were able to sack Rome, although they left many survivors and did not burn down much. This is another key attack that led to the fall of Rome. Depopulation occurring in Rome is thought to be another of the main reasons it fell. The factors that caused depopulation included disease, climate change, and war casualties. The impact depopulation caused on Rome, in addition to making Rome weaker in general and decreasing trade in cities, including lowering the numbers of their army. To combat the loss of people to serve as soldiers, the Romans added barbarians to their army, which may have led to the barbarians succeeding in their eternal attacks on Rome.
We believe that Rome did decline and fall, rather than transformed, because after the traditional date attributed to the fall of Rome, Rome no longer had such an impact on the rest of Europe. The economy of Rome completely fell apart. Long-distance trade, specialized production, and taxation disappeared in post-Rome. Although the eastern half of the empire still exists, the west was heavily fragmented, and Rome will never reach the power it once held again.